All right, so today is another Friday here at Britton Morrell, and I have, without any notice, dragged Nick Hindert. Hello, Nick.
Hello.
Here into the office, and I've known Nick now, 2 years?
About 2 years.
Not completely. Nick was a student of mine in my constitutional law class, and then Nick kind of, I don't know, you were required by your parole officer or something to get work or something. So basically, he was desperate, and we got him for minimum wage, and so he's just been slaving away. In fact, actually, the job offered was, in fact, didn't it ask drudgery work for slave wages or something like that. And so the reason, actually, that bringing Nick here to talk about drudgery and slave wages is because, oh yeah, see, you've got to see, every Friday we bring our dreaded hound to the office. This is Oliver. Oliver was rescued from a home where he killed people and ate their faces. So anyway, bringing Nick here for drudgery and slave wages, there's a reason, and that's because we're going to talk today about average weekly wage. In workers' compensation, a lot of your benefits, particularly the money benefits to you, depend upon what your average weekly wage is. And the more money that you made when you were injured, the more money that you will be compensated at in general. And that kind of makes sense because, for example, one of the benefits when you're injured on the job is called TTD or TPD. And Nick, what does that mean?
So those are either replacement wages if you're not in work, or you are getting your wages covered up to what your average weekly wage was, or 2/3 of what your average weekly wage was.
See, this is pretty good because I've thrown him on the spot. Literally, Nick had no idea we were going to do this live. So that means, like, you had no idea we were going to do this until like 3 minutes ago. So yeah, TTD and TPD are lost wages while you're treating and have restrictions, and you are losing wages because of the work injury. Either because a doctor has said you have restrictions, like for example, your normal work, you have to lift 20 pounds, but now you have restrictions saying you can't lift more than 10 pounds. And your employer says, well, we really don't have any work for you, you're going to get lost wage benefits. That's called temporary total disability. Let's suppose that your employer instead says, well, we've got some work for you, but really we only have maybe 4 hours of work a day, and so now you're losing some wages. TPD gives you 2/3 of those lost wages. And so what's really important in looking at, obviously, is the more you make, the more lost wages you're going to have. And there's some other benefits that are also dependent on a person's average weekly wage. An impairment rating for many people, it's not all, but your impairment rating also the value of it may depend upon your average weekly wage. So it goes without saying, it's really important that your average weekly wage is correct. And Nick's job here is, while he's engaged in drudgery work at slaves' wages, is to look at everyone else who's working, who's getting paid ever so much more than he is, for now, right? But his job is to help us look at each and every one of our clients' average weekly wage, because if we can increase a person's average weekly wage, that can have an incredible effect on the total compensation that the injured worker receives. And so you would ask yourself, why is this needed? Because doesn't the insurance company properly calculate my average weekly wage? And the answer, Nick, is?
They calculate it, but they might not necessarily do it as favorable as it could possibly happen.
And you would think that it's a simple matter of just, if you're on a salary, it might be a simple matter. Like if you make $1,000 a week on salary, and that's what you always make, regardless of the weather, regardless of how many hours you work, regardless of what's going on with the business, then calculating your average weekly wage might be very, very simple. But Nick, give us some examples that we've dealt with where just looking at the last 12 weeks and dividing the total earned by 12 weeks doesn't work?
So we have clients who are on seasonal fluctuating work. So while 12 weeks before their injury, they might have been working only 30 hours a week. If we go back further into a time where they had a higher workload, they might have been working 45 hours during that time. So if you just include 12 weeks, it's going to be a much smaller average weekly wage than if you go back to the time where they were making far more money because there was just more work.
Another example is, and we've seen this happen, where someone had to leave work for a vacation, or because someone passed away and so they needed to take a time off to attend the funeral. And then they get injured after they've come back. Maybe they've worked 3-4 weeks after they've come back, and they get injured. Well, the insurance adjuster just says to the employer, send me the wages for the last 12 weeks. And the employer does. And there's a week where you made 0. Well, they're still going to use that week and average it in. Well, unless you're allowed to take vacation 1 week every 12 weeks, or unless you plan on having family members die for whom you're going to go to their funerals 1 week out of every 12, and if that's the case, I'm sorry for you, then chances are those sorts of little anomalies should not be magnified by just looking at the 12 weeks. Maybe we need to look at something greater. There's also some other checklists that we look at. For example, talk about raises.
Yeah, so say 5 weeks before your injury, you got bumped up from $14 to $17 an hour. And now if you were just to take that average, you're going to use 8 weeks at the lower wage and only 4 weeks at the higher wage. But it's kind of unfair to calculate it like that, because that 40 hours you worked at the lower wage, under the new wage, you'd make a lot more money. So by just doing an average, it's going to be lower than if you were to adjust those hours by the new hourly wage.
So there's, kind of how it's calculated. And in fact, we can even get people's average weekly wages increased, not simply because of stuff that happened in the past prior to the injury, but also there's arguments that we have that the law accepts, or we can get someone's average weekly wage increased because they would have made more for some reason. So my classic example is I had a gentleman who worked for a temporary agency for a waste management company. This waste management company would bring on people to work, and after 3 months, the waste management company would go, yeah, we like this guy, so we're going to make him an offer and make him a regular employee. And so my guy actually got a letter saying, hey, start of next month, we're going to have you start working for us. This is what we're going to pay you. You were making $9 an hour at the temp agency. We're going to now be paying you directly $11 an hour, plus we're going to give you benefits, etc. And that's all going to start at the start of next month. And as you can guess it, because I'm telling the story, they got injured. And they got injured before they were supposed to become an employee. And so on that case, the adjuster was, at first breath, doing the right thing, which is basing his average weekly wage on the $9 an hour. And I was able to produce this letter and say, no, it needs to be higher, because he would have been making 11, but because of the injury, they didn't pick him up. And we were able to get that average weekly wage increased to what we could prove what would have happened in the future. In addition to wages, there are other things that go into average weekly wage. What are they?
So if you receive benefits, whether it's health insurance, you're driving a company car, you get housing assistance, all of that also factors in, because if you lose the job after the injury and you lose that insurance benefits, you are due the amount of money that those insurance benefits cost.
Correct. And so it's not all insurance, but primarily health insurance, dental, vision. That's considered compensation, and that's and for a lot of people, it's an increasing percentage of their compensation, these benefits. And so if during the injury you lose these benefits, then those benefits can be included in your average weekly wage. So how often, Nick, do you see, when you're calculating an average weekly wage and we're looking at it, how often do we think it's higher?
I would say probably 75% of the time we are able to go in and, with our calculations, increase the wages. And while it might only be $30, if the injury was 2 years ago, that $30 increase is going to go retroactively for 52 or however many weeks that you're going back, and so it can make a significant difference in your benefits.
And it's one of those things that it's one of those ways that injured workers are screwed because they don't even know it. And it's one thing if you're getting screwed and you know it, but it's even worse if you're getting screwed and you don't know it, although maybe some people would disagree with that. But regardless. And that is, they don't understand even what the average weekly wage or how it's been calculated, or they don't even know that there is such a thing, and that's what their benefits are being based on. Or they're told by the insurance adjuster, well, that's how it is. It's just 12 weeks and we do it, and that's what the law is. Well, that's not what the law is. And that's, again, yet another reason why, if you've been injured on the job, if you know someone who has been injured on the job here in Colorado, would you please tell them to give us a call. We offer free consultations. We can look at things. We can look at your average weekly wage and tell you if we think we can improve it. And if we can, that's better for you and better for your family. So, in the meantime, this is Britton and this is Nick, and we're going to say goodbye. Have a great weekend, and we will see you next week.
Thank you very much. Bye.